There are horror films that startle, frighten, and entertain, and then there are the ones that slip into theaters quietly, unnoticed, only to leave behind reactions so strange that no one ever managed to fully explain them. These were not the loud, controversial blockbusters. They were small, nearly forgotten titles that brushed past the public eye before something unusual happened inside those dark rooms. What set these films apart wasn't gore, monsters, or graphic terror. It was something subtler, something that reached beneath conscious awareness. Viewers left screenings drained, shaky, or overwhelmed by sensations they couldn't articulate. Some described a creeping pressure, others a sudden emptiness, and a few emerged with the unnerving feeling that the film had somehow observed them. Most reports never made it past a few lines in local newspapers, short, bewildered accounts that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Studio representatives dismissed everything as exaggeration. Theater managers chose silence. But despite that, the stories lingered. Accounts of people losing their sense of orientation, experiencing waves of panic, or walking out in a daze without fully understanding why. These films didn't rely on jump scares or conventional fright. Their power lay in atmosphere, sound, pacing, and psychological intrusion elements crafted in such a way that they bypassed normal defenses and lodged themselves deeper than anyone expected. If you continue watching, be prepared. We're about to revisit 15 obscure horror films known not for what they showed, but for how they changed the people who witnessed them. Fact 1. Few films have blurred the line between cinema and reality as effectively as Anguish. Early screenings revealed a disconcerting phenomenon. Viewers became uncertain where the story ended and the theater around them began. Audience members reported glancing behind them, convinced someone moved in the dark aisles. Flickering lights seemed to match the on-screen effects, amplifying a sense of instability. Groups of viewers simultaneously reacted with panic gripping seats, shielding their ears, overwhelmed by a sensory confusion that combined sound, visuals, and perception. Film scholars later analyzed the structure: rapid perspective shifts, irregular rhythms, and layered audio pulses designed to disorient the senses. The result was a state where the mind could not easily distinguish fiction from reality. Anguish does not frighten merely by what is shown. It destabilizes the viewer's instincts, making them question whether the fear originates from the screen or from the dark room surrounding them. Fact 2. Communion was expected to be a tense drama about trauma, but early screenings revealed a far more unsettling effect. Rather than simply provoking fear, the film seemed to activate deep, dormant anxieties in viewers, leaving them off balance long after leaving the theater. At the Los Angeles premiere, 2 attendees left during a key visitation scene. One complained of sudden dizziness, another claimed he felt a presence looming just behind him. Both refused to re-enter. In New York, a man experienced a panic spike during the climactic sequence, describing the masked figures as eerily familiar, evoking memories he couldn't identify. Analysis years later revealed subtle, rhythmic audio pulses embedded in the soundtrack. These oscillations, whether intentional or accidental, could heighten anxiety when paired with visual sequences of intrusion and violation. Communion unsettled audiences not through imagery, but by awakening unarticulated fears, turning the act of watching into a deeply personal experience. For many, the horror wasn't what the film depicted it was, how it affected their minds. Fact 3. Often overshadowed by more prominent telefilms, The Spell nevertheless left a profound mark on early audiences. Its effect wasn't the typical scare, it was emotional infiltration. Viewers reported feeling uneasy and agitated in ways that seemed to come from inside their own minds. During the initial broadcast, stations received multiple complaints from parents and viewers alike. Children became irritable during whisper-laden scenes. In Ohio, a mother recounted her daughter bursting into tears while claiming, "The voice isn't talking to them, it's talking to me." Years later, audio engineers analyzing the master tapes discovered subtle, low-frequency distortions buried in the soundtrack. Though nearly imperceptible, these tones could trigger heightened emotional sensitivity in some viewers, perhaps explaining the intense reactions. Psychologists reviewing reports suggested the film inadvertently induced a state of heightened susceptibility, causing viewers to feel as if the film's narrative were reaching into their own thoughts. The Spell didn't rely on overt horror or spectacle. Its unease came from what it stirred inside the audience, an unspoken fear of being observed and subtly manipulated. Fact 4. The premonition captivated early audiences not by spectacle, but by the uncanny feeling that the film mirrored their own minds. Viewers reported episodes of déjà vu, intrusive impressions, and the strange sense that the story knew more about them than it should. A teacher in Florida left a screening crying, insisting she had dreamed the exact sequence the night before. A teenager in Colorado fled midway, convinced she recognized a location she had never visited. Multiple attendees noted subtle echoes of thought and feeling that seemed to originate inside the film itself. Analysts later identified low-frequency pulses embedded in the soundtrack, which mimic patterns of intrusive thinking. The effect is a mental overlay. Viewers feel the film is interacting with their own private thoughts, creating a tension that is difficult to shake. The premonition unsettles by reflection rather than shock. It gives the impression that the story knows you and has quietly anticipated your fear. Fact 5. The appointment initially appears benign, but early viewers found themselves unnerved by the film's oppressive pacing and unpredictable audio patterns. Silence stretches uncomfortably, broken by abrupt, sharp cues that unsettle perception and disrupt the audience's sense of timing. At a Manchester screening, one woman claimed the movie felt longer than it actually is, as if time itself were distorted. A man fled during a telephone scene, stating it provoked a sudden, unexplainable dread. Staff noted that these reactions were widespread, but subtle audiences quietly disturbed rather than overtly terrified. Later studies highlighted the deliberate manipulation of rhythm. Long stretches of quiet interrupted by sudden spikes, creating an uncanny temporal dissonance. The brain struggles to process this mismatch, producing discomfort that grows with each scene. The appointment does not rely on visual shocks. It undermines the viewer's perception of reality, fracturing trust in one's own sense of time and space. Fact 6. The other side of madness is often remembered as an exploitation curiosity, but early audiences described a far stranger effect than mere fright. Instead of shocks or gore, viewers felt emotionally drained, as though the film quietly siphoned something from them. At an Arizona screening, a young couple walked out within minutes, claiming the film left them hollowed and disoriented. The woman later experienced a sudden panic episode, saying she heard whispers similar to what she'd noticed during the movie. Projectionists observed entire audiences sitting rigidly, like they had been immobilized by some invisible pressure. Decades later, analysts studying the film pointed to jagged musical cues, uneven rhythms, and conflicting audio signals as the likely triggers. These subtle inconsistencies create a slow, pervasive unease, bypassing conscious recognition and gnawing at the viewer's emotional stability. Rather than frightening with spectacle, the movie unsettles by eroding internal equilibrium. It leaves a void, a quiet, persistent disturbance that lingers after the credits roll. Fact 7. Let's play a game, an obscure independent horror from the 1970 seconds, screened only a handful of times before vanishing completely. Yet, those few showings left behind testimony of unusual emotional reactions. Archived reports describe viewers breaking down during the climax not from fear, but from an overwhelming sense of grief. One man reportedly wept repeatedly, saying, "I didn't mean for it to happen," though he offered no further explanation. Staff described him as disoriented and emotionally frayed. A group of teenagers exited silently, later admitting the film felt personal, as if it were exposing aspects of themselves they wished to hide. Historians have theorized that the movie included subliminal flashes of symbolic imagery combined with themes of guilt and confession, which may have heightened its emotional impact. The disappearance of the film has only amplified its legend. Every surviving account suggests the experience reached deeply into the viewer's psyche. Let's Play a Game didn't merely disturb its audience, it confronted them with themselves. Fact 8. Let's Scare Jessica to Death quietly earned a reputation among early viewers as a film that unsettled more than it frightened. Its dreamlike sequences, whispers, and unusual pacing produced feelings of intrusion, as if the film had reached inside the mind of the audience. At a Vermont screening, a man leapt from his seat during a whisper-laden monologue by Jessica, claiming someone had spoken directly to him. Theater staff assured him it was the audio track, but he insisted it was something closer, something personal. In Michigan, 3 viewers left during the final act without uttering a word. One later admitted that the film felt as if it were overlaying its thoughts on mine, leaving them unnerved and silent. Experts later discovered the soundtrack contained overlapping whispers in separate channels, creating the sensation of internal voices. The result is a disorienting effect that blurs the boundary between one's own thoughts and external stimuli. Let's Scare Jessica to Death doesn't attack the senses. It invades them, quietly unsettling the viewer on a level they cannot consciously recognize. Fact 9. Don't Go to Sleep might seem like a conventional television thriller, yet its earliest screenings provoked an unexpected and subtle unease among viewers. Instead of overt fear, the film produced a creeping physiological discomfort, a pressure that seemed to rise inside the chest and throat without warning. At a private test screening, several attendees described a sensation as though the air itself had grown heavier. One woman left in tears, insisting the film was infiltrating the moment with someone else's presence. Her reaction was not panic, but a deep internal disturbance that lingered long after leaving the theater. Another early viewer, a teenage boy, briefly fainted during a scene where an unseen presence moves just out of frame. Family members confirmed he had no medical condition to explain the reaction. The incident was quietly omitted from official logs. Audio analysts later discovered faint, high-frequency tones embedded in the soundtrack. While largely imperceptible, these sounds can evoke subtle anxiety responses, explaining why viewers felt tension even in otherwise calm scenes. Don't Go to Sleep doesn't shock. It infiltrates slowly, imperceptibly, until the viewer senses something is fundamentally off. Fact 10. At first glance, the child appears to be a rough-edged, supernatural oddity, uneven acting, strange pacing, surreal atmosphere, but early audiences sensed something far more unsettling beneath its imperfections. The film didn't scare them outright, it disoriented them. During a midnight screening in California, viewers described an odd heaviness during scenes centered on the young girl's emotionless stare. One man claimed her gaze felt like it reached behind his eyes, triggering a tension he couldn't shake. Another woman exited abruptly, insisting the soundscape wasn't aligned with the images in a way that made her feel physically unsteady. Years later, audio reviewers uncovered irregular loops of whispers, breaths, and faint cries embedded beneath the soundtrack, sounds that don't quite sync with the visuals. This mismatch creates a cognitive strain, triggering discomfort long before the viewer consciously identifies why. Projectionists recalled that people would leave quietly and without explanation. They didn't panic, they simply slipped out, as if the film had disrupted something internal they didn't want to confront. The child unsettles not through overt horror, but through contradiction images that don't match sound, stillness that feels alive, innocence that feels wrong. The mind tries to reconcile these elements, and fails. The real horror isn't on the screen, it's in the mental static left behind. Fact 11. Though marketed as a stylized thriller, the comeback unsettled its earliest audiences in ways no one involved could explain. Instead of provoking fear, the film evoked a gradual tightening in the chest, a sense of emotional compression that grew stronger with each surreal sequence. During a screening in London, a woman abruptly rose to her feet during one of the pastel-toned nightmare scenes, insisting the colors were closing around her thoughts. She trembled as staff guided her out, unable to describe precisely what had overwhelmed her. A Chicago showing produced a similarly strange moment. An entire row of viewers collectively jerked backward during a masked figure sequence. Staff described the movement as unnervingly synchronized, like a single reflex shared among strangers. Years later, audio analysts discovered faint tonal inconsistencies hidden beneath the soundtrack frequencies capable of disturbing emotional regulation without conscious awareness. Whether intentional or accidental, these sounds heightened the film's dreamlike unease, making viewers feel as if they were drifting slightly outside their own minds. The comeback doesn't frighten directly, it presses inward, blurring the line between emotional tension and quiet panic until the viewer feels the world lean ever so slightly off its axis. Fact 12. When The Night Visitor quietly entered a handful of Scandinavian and Midwestern theaters, early audiences weren't prepared for the creeping chill it left behind. Critics dismissed it as slow and grim, yet viewers reported an entirely different experience, one that lingered in the mind like footsteps following too close behind. In Minnesota, theater staff recalled people drifting into the lobby with vacant expressions, as if waking from a dream they didn't remember having. One elderly man walked outside and circled the building multiple times, whispering that he heard someone tracking him through the scenes. A woman later said she felt the film shadowing her, as though something unseen had moved in lockstep with her emotions. When film experts revisited the movie decades later, they noticed its unusual visual composition: low angles, skewed framing, and extended shots that sit on the edge of the viewer's peripheral vision. These choices replicate the unsettling sense of being observed subtly, persistently, without clear origin. What made the film so unnerving was not what it showed, but how it watched. There are no jump scares, no sudden shocks, just an icy presence that seems to follow the audience out of the theater and linger behind them long after. The night visitor doesn't pursue its viewers. It shadows them quietly, patiently, until they start to wonder whether they're truly alone. Fact 13. The Evictors hides its true impact behind a warm, nostalgic facade. Its rural setting, soft lighting, and slow pacing give the illusion of safety, yet early audiences discovered an undercurrent of unease that grew heavier with every scene. At a Louisiana screening, a group of college students reported feeling an inexplicable tension settling over them, building in a way that felt deeply personal. One student said the movie made him feel watched, as if an unseen presence were studying the audience rather than the characters on screen. A particularly striking incident happened in Texas. A woman rushed out midway through the film, visibly shaken. She claimed one of the long, voyeuristic shots felt like it was directed specifically at her, even though nothing about the framing suggested anything unusual to the staff. Later analysis revealed the film's reliance on perspective shots that mimic the gaze of an unseen stalker. These sequences subtly shift the viewer into the position of being observed rather than observing, creating a psychological reversal that the mind recognizes instinctively, even if the viewer can't articulate it. Instead of frightening with brutality or shock, The Evictors builds terror through implication. It cultivates the uneasy sense that someone or something is looming just outside the frame, waiting for the viewer to notice. Fact 14. Although largely overlooked at the time of its release, The Demon generated a surprising stream of unusual reactions from early audiences. Rather than frightening people outright, the film created a sensation of imbalance, like the story kept leaning just slightly off-center, pulling the viewer with it. During a screening in Arkansas, multiple viewers exited abruptly, each describing a discomfort that seemed to originate in their thoughts rather than their bodies. One man said it felt like his mind kept slipping, and another insisted the final scenes made him feel as though the floor were subtly shifting beneath him. Projectionists noticed that crowds often froze during specific hallway scenes, moments so still and tense that a manager later described the room as collectively locked in place, like time had paused for everyone at once. Film scholars revisiting The Demon years later identified unusual editing rhythms, cuts held too long, shadows arranged just slightly off the expected axis, and pacing designed in a way that disrupts natural mental processing. It doesn't shock the viewer, it destabilizes them. The film's power lies in its ability to tilt the viewer's internal compass. People didn't walk out terrified, they walked out unsettled, unsure why their thoughts felt misaligned. Fact 15. The Attic presents itself as a quiet, melancholy character study, hardly the kind of film anyone would expect to unsettle audiences. Yet during its small theatrical run, something curious happened. People didn't leave the theater screaming or shaken by fear. They left looking emotionally hollowed out. In several Midwestern cities, theater staff described viewers stepping into the lobby with unfocused eyes, as if the film had pressed a weight onto their thoughts. One woman stayed in her seat after the credits, staring ahead with trembling hands. When an usher approached, she whispered that the story felt too close to a place she tries not to visit, though she wouldn't clarify further. Analysts who later examined the film noticed its reliance on prolonged emotional framing shots that lingered just a few seconds longer than comfortable, allowing the viewer's mind to drift into vulnerable territory. Combined with stretches of oppressive silence, the effect creates a slow internal unraveling rather than overt dread. A few attendees reported episodes of disorientation, feeling detached from themselves during the later scenes. Nothing dramatic, yet troubling enough that some theaters quietly reduced showings. The Attic doesn't terrify through spectacle. It tightens its grip by quietly peeling back emotional layers until viewers realize, too late, that something inside them has stirred. Bonus film. While largely forgotten outside niche horror circles, The Possessed quietly built a reputation during its earliest screenings for the strange, lingering effects it left on audiences. The film didn't frighten with gore or shock, it unsettled on a personal level, leaving viewers feeling as if something had followed them home. At a Seattle screening, a woman suddenly froze during a distorted vocal sequence, later reporting that the voice felt directed at me. She was calm but deeply shaken, as if the film had recognized something within her. Nearby attendees reported subtle, almost imperceptible murmurs during quiet moments, though projectionists confirmed no errors occurred. In Ohio, a schoolteacher left mid-film, visibly distressed. She insisted she felt a breath on her neck during a close-up, even though her row was nearly empty. Multiple viewers described similar faint auditory phenomena, creating the sense that the film was interacting with them personally. Film scholars later identified extended close-ups and prolonged emotional beats that produce what some call empathetic compression, where the audience absorbs characters' distress in a profoundly intimate way. The effect unsettles viewers long after the credits. Some claim to notice flickering movement in their peripheral vision afterward, or the subtle impression of a presence lingering nearby. These were not dramatic hallucinations, but a quiet, unnerving persistence. The possessed doesn't chase you with monsters or demons. It leaves the viewer with the unsettling thought that some part of the film may have quietly accompanied them out of the theater. If you've made it through these stories, take a moment to feel the weight they leave behind. Some films terrify instantly, but these linger, quietly affecting the mind long after the lights go up. For more hidden horrors, lost reels, and dark corners of cinema that few ever explore, make sure to like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you never miss an episode. On The Night Shriek, we don't just revisit forgotten films, we uncover the ones that were never meant to be remembered.